the kettle into the enamel washing-up bowl, her thoughts turned to the ordeal facing her the following day. Apart from the threat of flying bombs, there was the prospect of meeting Cliff's mother, Lynette. How was she going to broach the subject of adoption? The woman might not take kindly to being asked to formally give up her son, notwithstanding that she hadn't contacted him for 4 years. A sense of dread welled up at the thought of the scene that might follow. The age-spotted clock over the range showed 10 minutes to 9. Where was Cliff? She turned the knurled knob on the wireless. Its window glowed amber as she waited for the set to warm up. The announcer was reading the news headlines when the back door banged open. Bringing in a blast of cold air, Cliff bounced in, face radiant. "Auntie May," he said. "Look what I've got us." She felt a surge of pleasure at his appearance, even as she noticed his muddy boots on the clean lino. She turned off the wireless. With a flourish, Cliff brandished a brace of pheasants. Dead wings flapped open as he held up the birds by their clawed feet. She had an image of Ephraim's face glowing with vindictive delight. "Where did she get them?" The smile left Cliff's face to be replaced with that guarded look she hadn't seen for a long time. That look he'd had when he first came to the village. Although he was often up to mischief, climbing over fences, scrumping apples, and building dens with precious firewood, he was accused by Ephraim of being behind everything from water leaks to fuel thefts. How the Weasley warden would relish adding poaching to Cliff's misdemeanors. She felt a tightness in her chest. Her job could be in jeopardy if he'd poached from the farm, but she shouldn't have snapped. She should have waited for him to explain. The sound of the crackling fire and the ticking of the old clock filled the silence. "Well?" "I didn't poach him." He always reverted to his backstreet accent when he was upset. "Damn. I didn't say you did, but where did they come from?" "A friend." He dumped the birds on the table, kicked off his boots, and walked to the stairs door. "I thought you'd be pleased. I'm going to bed." "Cliff?" The door slammed. The stairs creaked as he climbed them. She was as bad as Ephraim. Picking up the birds, she wiped a smear of blood from the table and carried their dead weight to the icy scullery. Chapter 2. Cliff kicked the bedroom door shut. After all the talk she'd given him, telling him it was a bad thing to take what didn't belong to you, how could she think he'd pinched the pheasants? She thought he hadn't learned anything. Maybe he'd be better off with his mum. Auntie May had stood up for him in the beginning, when old Potty had threatened to call the coppers after he'd pinched his apples. Potty said he'd been going to win a cup with them, and he wanted Cliff to pay. He had nothing. His mum would have killed him if he'd been sent back to Southampton owing money. He'd been really scared. But Auntie May told the old misery guts that he'd never seen fruit on trees before and hadn't known they belonged to someone. She'd shamed old Potty, said how bad he'd looked trying to get money from an evacuee. In the end, he'd piped down. But now, she thought he'd nicked something. He knew you couldn't just take things, especially when stuff was rationed and there wasn't enough to go around. The room was icy. He ripped off his clothes and dragged on his pajamas. The springs twanged as he leapt into bed, still buttoning his pajama jacket. He slid his feet between the sheets. The warm sheets. He wriggled his toes into the fluffy jumper wrapped around the stone hot water bottle. Auntie May had put a bottle in his bed. He hadn't even washed. He would have done, and he would have told her about the pheasants if she hadn't decided he'd been poaching. His mum never checked that he'd washed or cleaned his teeth, even on the night she wasn't out when he went to bed. He heard the clatter of the latch as Auntie May closed the scullery door. He shouldn't have slammed out on her. He liked it that she was always there. It was a snuggly feeling, like the hot water bottle. Sometimes, back in the city, he'd wet the bed rather than go out to the privy in the dark. The shouts from the street scared him as much as the black shadows in the yard, and more than the thought of the clip round the ear he'd get when his mum found the wet sheets. Auntie May hadn't got cross when he'd wet the bed. She got a rubber sheet and gave him a gazunder to pee in. But he wasn't scared here, and after the first week, never needed it. Some evacuees had to wash their own sheets if they peed the bed. One boy was thrashed. He turned over and wriggled down the bed. He was never scared here. He closed his eyes and remembered.